I've never seen a diamond in the flesh. I cut my teeth on wedding rings.
Dude, that's pretty cool.
Man, that is a sad clown.
Dude, that's pretty good.
This is The Gloom, bringing you weekly interviews with F3 Omaha packs, exploring their F3 experiences and finding those sticky elements that create the glue in the gloom.
You don't want to miss even an instant of the brilliance that's about to happen.
It's unfolding before your eyes.
Before we get started, why don't you introduce yourself to Dredd, actually and myself too, because I don't think we've ever met before, have we?
No, I don't think so. Rampley Hardy, 36, The Plague, Omaha, F3 guy. Been doing F3 since 2018, and we started this podcast last year, just kind of interviewing guys, really focused on their kind of journey and as their journey intersected F3, kind of walking them through, first, second, and third F, Q source, kind of just hearing what the impact F3 has had on their lives. So we're excited. The other gentleman is Pony. I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, so I'm John Whitworth, 30 Pony Express. Actually was the first interviewee for this Gloom podcast. And this actually was kind of born from a general idea that Plague and I don't think that our great ideas are being vocalized enough, so we needed to get them out there into the ether.
You do know that's the reason we started all the podcasts we started.
Sure, no, absolutely. No, but in reality, I think what we kind of noticed was, we had a conversation with our Nantan at one point where, we kind of noticed this theme around year 2, year 3 of guys, whatever this phenomenon is, their enthusiasm starts to die down. Mm-hmm. At least we've noticed that within our own region. So we're like, well, could this be a supplement to kind of keep them engaged? And we actually, Plague's right. We started with asking guys their stories, but we started with the leaders, the former site Qs, former comms Qs, former leaders in our groups. And so that's where we really started to say, okay, well, let's keep these guys engaged. And then we were really like blowing up. And we may want to talk about that at some point. We've had some huge expansion. I know you guys have all gone through that, but with that, we really wanted to focus on, okay, well, we're going through this huge group. It's no longer this best kept little secret. It's, it's for the masses now. It's huge, but we want to be able to look back and say, here's where the roots were. Here's where they started. Here's where we came from. And here's some of the guys that were involved from the beginning. So sure. They may not be here anymore, but here's their story. So
no, I love it. We lovingly refer to what you're talking about as the dip. That's what I call it, the dip. Yep. And it is. It's sometimes it's around 2 or 3 years. Usually it's not a specific set of time. Usually, I think the average I would call it is probably four-ish years. But it is. That's what happens. The guys who started it, they ran out of what's next. And as soon as they ran out of what's next, they just kind of disengage. And so that's one of the things we're focused on. And that's why I love what you're doing, because we're trying to figure out how do we provide them with the next what's next. Right? Yeah. Excellent work.
I guess, do you guys want to introduce yourselves? I guess I hate to assume that everybody knows who the two of you are, even though.
If you don't know who I am, then you got to. No, I'm just kidding. Frank Schwartz, 46, Dark Helmet.
Day Riding Dredd 5'8". Gramps, almost 60.
Yep.
Respect.
Yeah. I guess what's and kind of the topic for today. So as we've been listening to the Minivan Centurion content and really just enjoying what you're putting out there, I think we're seeing a lot of alignment in the stories we hear from guys and also some of the other kind of F3 content. So I wanted to just get some thoughts from you on kind of how Minivan Centurion maybe does or doesn't fit with F3. I know you've covered that a little bit on some of your episodes, but also kind of also wanted to dive into like Concentrica, Minivan Centurion. How does all of that relate, and really kind of helping some of the guys from our region that listen in to kind of explore how do they adopt some of the Minivan Centurion concepts.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah. Okay.
our time is yours.
Yeah.
We're loving it.
I guess for me, what really got me interested in F3 was the Concentrica. So I was already doing a lot of, first F kind of working out stuff, but a buddy of mine said, hey, there's this really great concept that totally wipes work-life balance out of the water, right? It gets rid of that concept and allows you to focus on relationships in your life. So I love the Concentrica model, and it's been really helpful for me. So as I listen to some of the MC content, I guess the first question I have is like, is the essentials, the radical notions, some of that stuff, is that on a per relationship basis, or what does that look like? I think it gets a little bit muddy as you're kind of looking at, your main role or your primary purpose is to love and protect your family, but then how does this roll out to like shield lock and maybe blade relationships? What do you guys think there?
Yeah, I mean, those are good questions. I mean, I think I want to start with why write that book in the first place. The Minivan Centurion. So the Minivan Centurion concept is about 11 or 12 years old. Like there's an old blog post somebody dug up. Like I had this Google blog, really, I think it's before F3, where I first wrote that. And I don't remember what put it in my head. I think I might have been watching the miniseries Rome. That was on HBO in the mid-noughts. And the main character, one of the main characters is a centurion. And he's just like this stalwart guy. He has no aspirations, political aspirations. He just takes care of his century. And he's a tough guy. He takes care of his family. He has a troubled marriage, but he realizes because he's been gone a lot. It's a great way to tell the story of Rome. It's like 2 seasons long. You watch all of them. And I think that got me thinking about what centurions were, because I don't think I really knew. And that was also about the time I became a Christian. So I was studying the Bible, and centurions appear in the Bible. And so I just started looking and thinking about centurions, and it got in my head that a centurion was a very unique character in history. But they were the glue of the Roman Empire. And when they ceased to exist, not in short order, so did the Roman Empire. And I said, does it exist in America? I was asking myself that. And that's when I wrote that first blog post. And then I think it's in the last chapter of Free to Lead. The Minivan Centurion, makes his appearance. And then really since then I would talk about it but I really never sat down to write about it in any way. Wrote the Q source, I think in 2015 or so. And after that, I wrote a book about litigation. I'm a lawyer in my day job. And I wrote basically the Q source for litigators, which 3 people have read, including me.
All of which were forced.
But it took a long time to write. So when I was done with
okay.
that,
I'm an attorney and I haven't read it, so.
Oh yeah, okay.
not saying.
Yeah, we'll jam it down your thing. I make the guys who work for me read it. They tell me that they're appreciative of it because when I wrote, the point of that book is to say, man, I wish somebody handed me a book when I started, because I graduated law school, but I didn't know how to be a litigator, and no one ever really told me. So I kind of wrote it from that standpoint. So after I was done with that, I think we were just getting into COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And that was 20. And 20 was when we had all the BLM stuff and the
George Floyd,
Floyd,
Portland burned, and
right.
Yeah.
And I looked around and I said, this is like the last days of Rome in a way.
Yeah.
And there's no middle anymore. We had our 4th of July convergence here in Charlotte, and which we usually do. And it was like 100 guys. I think I was still in Nantan. And the local Nantan asked me to say a few words about, and I love talking about America. And, I said, big difference between, I talked about America and, what 4th of July meant. I, feeling pretty good about myself, walked away. and I'm walking to my car, and a guy who's been in F3 for a long time and in Metro for a long time, he and I do not see eye to eye on politics and some other stuff, but he's been a stalwart F3 guy. He comes up to me with a paper bag right by my car. This is right after I've given this speech.
This rousing tribute to America.
And he says, will you draw a single piece of paper out of this paper bag, please? And I looked at him and I smiled and I said, no, of course I won't do that. And he said, why? And I said, because you're always up to something, and you're up to something now. And I'm not going to be a foil for whatever whatever reindeer game you're playing. And he says, well, I'm doing he was getting his master's in leadership or something.
Okay.
And I'll probably clued you into his.
I had a funny feeling anyway, but yeah.
And I said, he goes, this is a part of the project we're doing, and all I really need you to do is pick out the piece of paper and tell me, how it makes you feel, and whatever you say is fine. And anyway, if you would consent to it, I would record what you said. And I said, you must record it. I'm gonna do that. So I do. I
put it on the local news.
I put my hand in this bag and I pull out a piece of paper, and it said George Floyd on it.
Oh.
And I said, it doesn't make me feel anything. And he said, why not? I said, because I live 3,000 miles away.
Yeah.
Because the trial hasn't happened yet. I'm an attorney.
Yeah, I said, I don't even know who's guilty or innocent.
I said, I would have to hear the evidence, and then there's no feelings I could have. I said, what else you got in there? Anyway,
they're all George Floyd.
No, half of them were. I forgot the guy's name.
The cop.
The cop.
Oh.
So the idea was you pulled one or the other, and then you were supposed to talk about whatever. And I said, I'm going to tell you how I feel about it, man. And I got mad at him, of course. And I said, the guy is Chauvin, right? Chauvin. I watched the video. It looked to me like he wasn't doing what he's supposed to do. But this is America. We're a land of rules and laws, not a land of feelings. And the guy gets his trial, and if he's convicted, and the jury, and he gets a fair trial, and he gets his appellate rights, and he's convicted, and he goes to jail, and the judge sentences him within the sentencing guidelines that are applicable in the state of Minnesota, then why should I have any feelings about that as a citizen of a city, county, and state 2,000 miles away? And he's like, well, that's fine. That's the way you feel about it. I was like, yeah, that's the way I feel about it.
Yeah.
This guy and I have had several
little dust-ups
over the years.
Minor.
He's a big Woody Hayes fan, the only one in America. Okay, so figure the math.
Wait, is that a sports thing?
Yeah, sports
thing.
Okay. All right. So I tell that story because it's emblematic about the way I thought people were starting to act. It's like this has nothing to do with my community,
right?
And yet we're having these protests in my community about stuff that has nothing to do with us.
And not only that, but he gave the fact that there were only two names in the back.
Right. So
you're forced to pick one or the other.
Right.
Yeah.
But I also felt, and still do, that a lot of what was being said was true and accurate and needed to be addressed. I still do.
Sure.
I mean, I think there's plenty of things that police officers don't do across the board, or do that we need to address, and that's why we have laws, and we need to stick to them. I mean, I'm neither Blue Lives nor Black Lives Matter, and that's when I started thinking about it's all these guys who are everything is one or the other. That was that paper bag, one name or the other.
Period.
And your feelings are important.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's not the way a centurion would approach it. A centurion would say, life is complicated and there's a lot of nuances. And almost every situation, people are making bad decisions and they're compromising what they're doing. And, Derek Chauvin could have been wrong as hell. And I actually think he was. Sure. I don't care if he was following the law or not.
Sure.
He was morally wrong for what he did. That's my opinion based on what I saw. And I think he needed to get a fair trial.
Right. Wait, those are conflicting thoughts. You held them both in your head at the same time.
Well, that to me is the essence of the centurion. Is a guy that can hold conflicting thoughts at the same time. And the Minivan Centurion stationed in Judea in the time of Jesus were the representatives of Roman power on earth, and they had 80 men and their families to look out for, and they had a job to do. And if they didn't do their job, they could find themselves on a crucifix. And yet, the centurions in the Bible also appealed to Jesus to save their servants' lives, to heal them.
Yeah.
And also, one of them was converted by Peter, Cornelius, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also, one of them was standing at the foot of the cross.
And said, truly,
he was the Son of God, right?
Yeah.
And if you take all those things together, it's like this is the life of what a man actually is in his community, right?
Yeah.
He's many, many things. And it got me thinking about trying to structure that and say, this is what a man in his community who loves his family, loves his community, and loves his nation, but is on a compromised adventure.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the right to do whatever he wants. Can't cut people off in traffic. He can't do all that. Can't yell at people.
Right.
He's got to do his best to influence people to their best advantage. What would that look like? How would I describe it? And that's what got me writing the book. And actually, it didn't take that long. It took like 3 months.
Well, you've been thinking about it a little while.
I've been thinking about it. And also, I will gladly admit and confess, because it ain't that big of a confession. My leadership was for crap during COVID, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, thank you for being my friend, but this COVID was an opportunity, I think, for me as the then Nantan of F3 to chart a course through these difficult times, be a man of tremendous positive energy, and a man who brought people together at different feelings. And too often, not always,
sure,
too often, I let my anger and my bias against the governmental restrictions, because I was totally opposed. I could not set that aside. And too often I was strident and angry and probably lost opportunities to influence people.
Well, I mean, how do you reconcile that, right? At what moment were you like, hey, I am really doing a disservice, or am I missing out on this opportunity? Was there a specific event that came up, or was it just some self-reflection? You finally took some time to say, oh, I dropped the ball here. Here's where I can do better.
Well, one night I was sitting in Italian restaurants next to my office, and I was drinking beer. My wife was out of town. I was eating, this is kind of my regular haunt, So I'm sitting at the bar, and I was looking at tweets, and I started out okay, and then I started tweeting some pretty angry stuff. And in the midst of it, Checkpoint, who in the book is called Tom Wilson or Tim Watson.
Tim Watson, yeah. Oh, spoiler alert.
Yeah. Just text me and says, either you're angry or you're drunk or both. Put your phone down and thank me in the morning.
Which is exactly what you say to Dredd if you want to piss him off.
Well, no, actually, I put my phone down and I did thank him in the morning.
Okay, good.
Because he was absolutely right. And the funny part about it is that Tim Watson and I disagreed about 99% of what the government did.
Yeah, opposite ends for sure.
And every time he would show up at a workout, I'd be like, why are you even here? If you he's like, well, I was like, you're just making your own rules to accommodate yourself.
Right.
But I don't know. So that night was kind of a watershed in my mind. And I had a couple like those. I didn't have one, remarkable moment. I ripped into this local guy here in Charlotte, a teacher, because I was so mad at teachers. I filed a lawsuit against the school board here about virtual school, and I was absolutely right. I was absolutely certain that within short order they would admit that they had done a horrible job with kids, and I was absolutely right about that.
Yeah. Well,
I shouldn't even say, right?
Yeah. I don't know how it was short order.
Right.
Yeah.
But I was so mad at teachers that I could not have a reasonable conversation. This guy's an F3 guy, and I ripped into him on Twitter, and he's a young guy, so you really shouldn't have done it. Anyway, after he's fighting Mongol, calls me on the phone, and he says, "I'm not sure you should have done that." I'm like, "Well, I was right." And he's like, "Yeah, but you weren't doing right."
Ouch.
Yeah, I was like, "Yeah." So he's one of my blades, so I was like, "Man, I don't like to be hoisted on my own petard here, Mongol, but you're right. You're right that in that moment, being right trumped doing right." And that also became kind of a major theme, I think, of the Minivan.
I was going to say that's one of the big ones.
Yeah,
right. That kind of flows through all of it. Yeah,
that's right.
Absolutely.
And I guess something I hear you talking about is really there are some things that you brought forward in Free to Lead, right? Like the Reacher or the Flux or Pogo 40, kind of the circumstances of life that really it's always in flux, right? And so I think what happened with COVID that was so interesting was people started to, like you said, move out of the middle, even though really nothing was different with COVID, right? It's just another thing that was kind of shaking up our world. And I think as we've interviewed guys and kind of asked them about their interaction with F3 during COVID, a lot of guys actually came back. So we had some restrictions in place, but we could still work out with smaller group sizes. And so it's interesting that as COVID happened kind of in the world, a lot of our regional guys came back to F3 as sort of the middle. And so I think, one of the things I'm curious your thoughts on, like, does the guy who comes to F3 and stays in F3 are a lot of the guys that stay already kind of this andist mindset, or do you think there's a fair number of guys that are still staying around F3 but becoming aurist, or what's your perspective on that?
I think
they're andist curious.
I think
yeah.
I think that all of us in our better natures are andists. Like every once in a while, somebody will point out to me, "Oh, I wasn't very andist of you." I was like, "I didn't say I was perfect." It's aspirational, right?
Sure.
But I want to think that F3 is having that positive effect, in the places where it is.
And I think it definitely is. And I think part of that is because of the way it's designed. You get to work. I mean, really, truly, unless you participate at some level in some second F or something, and it happens to go kind of, in some certain direction or other, you don't even know. You have no idea, right? That's one of my favorite things about it. And I think that's part of why it's uniquely positioned to be the middle holder. Is I could work out to a guy, or work out with a guy on one side of me who's a cardiac surgeon, makes $1 bajillion a year, and the guy on my left is a recovering alcoholic. And just barely out of recovery. And he's just barely got himself into a home and got his first job at like Panera Bread or something, making minimum wage, right? And these two guys will work out together. They might be partnering in the workout. They'll have no idea. And they won't care because it won't matter. And the reason it won't matter is because the mission is clear. The mission for what we're trying to do is above. It supersedes any feelings we have or any differences we have or anything like that. And I think that's part of why, you look at like Q-Source written as what I would contend, and we've talked about before, is kind of a framework for here's what F3 leadership ought to look like. And then you took the Minivan Centurion and kind of said, now let me kind of paint a picture for you of if a guy is living like Q-Source indicates, this is what he would look like. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that is a good way. Actually, we were just talking about that in the other podcast.
That's why I so brilliantly said it just now. Could you not out me? I'm trying to look smart.
Right. It's well, no, I mean, I forgot. So it's I would hope that if somebody read, and why anybody would subject himself to this, I don't know. If somebody read everything I wrote, they were like, "You're fairly consistent."
No, I think you're very consistent. But yeah.
But so Free to Lead says, okay, what the premise of Free to Lead is, look, here's what's going on. Whether we like, here's what's going on in our lives. Our lives are too darn easy. Food's too easy to get. We don't have any friends. It's impossible to stay fit because you don't have to, hunt for your food.
Right. There's that picture of like the escalator that goes into the gym.
That's right.
Right. I mean, it's a joke, right?
I mean, now that 5% of the population is involved in food gathering, the rest of us are selling, insurance and stuff. So, so it's, you've taken that away. And then, so you don't have the close friendships, and then not surprisingly, you drift away from God. So you lead these purposeless lives. So sad clown syndrome is taken over. Men without a beauty to rescue, an adventure to live, the whole thing. Right. And I didn't even know about that when I wrote the book, but I think that what Free to Lead was trying to get across is, here's a problem, here's a solution that, at least at the time, it was very limited.
Yeah.
In geography, but it works. So you could pick up that book and say, "Oh yeah, I am that guy," and you're right. I want to get.
And that's,
right.
I mean, not to make it whatever, that's exactly what happens. Right. That's happened to me. It probably, could have very well happened to you guys. And certainly it happened to hundreds of thousands of guys that listen to your podcast. That's exactly what it was. And that's one of the things I love, and is that you have a very unique ability to articulate the things and to observe them as they are, and to articulate them in a way that is super relatable, that we all just kind of go, because that's, I've told you that how many times, right? I look and I go, by golly, yes, I didn't know I was allowed to feel that way, because society's been telling me to feel a different way forever.
Right.
And I didn't know I was allowed. I didn't know there were other guys that did feel that way. And damn it, if that's the way that you feel and I feel that way, well, we got a burgeoning social movement of 2+ here.
Yeah. And I think that the Q source then just provides practicality, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
Not being overly prescriptive. You got to do it this way, but more like identifying the categories.
Yeah.
Like this is a category of life.
Yeah.
This is where they fit. So the concentrica is actually in Free to Lead, I believe, as well.
Yeah.
And but I was like, okay, how do I, just knowing it is one thing, but what do you actually do about it?
Yeah,
right?
You broke it down. I think in Free to Lead, I don't remember if it had anywhere near
quite as detailed, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Free to Lead talks about the number of people that might attend your funeral based on
right.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I think the idea, the biggest idea of that part of the Q source is the idea that your wife is the center of your relationship.
Yeah.
Being transformative, changing you from me to us,
right,
forcing you to abandon a lot of the desires of your heart, or compromise them.
Yeah.
Or realize that actually those were faulty. That really what you should yearn for is a accelerating and vibrant and powerful relationship with your wife. That's what you should, because that's at the center.
Right. And it is the team you will be on the longest.
That's right. It's the most important one.
Yeah.
And and maybe that's why we haven't gotten, beat up by the culture so much, because, what's a woman going to say? You guys love us too much?
Right. That's true. That's true.
I did have my M read the Minivan Centurion, and of course I was like, you got to read this. It explains everything that I'm thinking. And she said, well, he must be writing to men because it's a little bit repetitive. So that was kind of her feedback.
Yeah.
But I am curious then. So does the Minivan Centurion? Because I've had a couple conversations with some guys about the radical notions or the essentials of the burgeoning movement of MC Curious, and so are the essentials or the radical notions of this movement, the God before God is first, and love your neighbor as others, or is that more of an example of kind of essentials in a faith-based relationship, or tell me more about that.
So the Minivan Centurion is uniquely American in a sense, right? And so what it is, what it reflects is my belief that America is exceptional and we're here for a purpose. And American men, that means we have a purpose. Doesn't mean if you're a German guy, you can't participate in that. It just means that America is what it is.
So it also doesn't mean that you don't have a purpose. It just, we don't know if it's the same or not.
Right. So the first radical notion is that the tomb was empty. That's the first radical notion, right? And you don't have to believe that. I do, but you don't have to recognize that radical notion changed the world, right? So it could be a radical lie, but
the fact that we celebrate once a year,
we changed the calendar,
entire everything,
changed the calendar. I mean, it transformed the largest, most powerful nation on earth to the Holy Roman Empire. I mean, think about it, right? One little 12-man, 11-man group in the year 30.
Replaced him later.
Replaced him in the year 30, right? It was a radical notion. And then the second radical notion is that all men are created equal, which is 1,700 years later and change, which is just as radical, right? In its time, that wasn't the way the world ran. The world ran by status hierarchies. You know, for a bunch of knuckleheads in a backwater colony to tell the most powerful man on earth, send him a demand letter and say, yeah, you screwed up. We're all created equal. You're not the king anymore. Here's the specific ways you have. And by the way, we're going to do better. And we're going to write up a new government and you're done.
And you're not invited.
I mean, that's pretty radical, right? And you could say, well, I disagree that all men are created equal. Most people wouldn't say that. But a lot of people do say, oh, that promise was not fulfilled, right? You said all men are created equal. And at the time, half the country was enslaved.
Right.
How could you possibly say that? And that, you know, later in the book, we're like, yeah, that was a radical notion that took 80 or 90 years to become de jure fulfilled with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And then another 100 years to really on the ground where you could say, you know, for the most part, that the promise of the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal, that is now fulfilled to a great extent.
Yes. I mean, is there work to do? Sure.
Yes.
But,
always something.
Yeah.
There's always something.
But
right.
yeah, we're there.
Yeah. We're never going to sit on our laurels. But so the idea of the radical notions are really to help an American man, say a particularly young American man.
Oh, maybe like yourself there, Flaherty. I don't know.
Yeah. A youngish man. How old are you, Flaherty?
36.
36.
Yeah, there you go.
Flaherty, I thought his name was Poco Rabanne.
It's Poco Rabanne.
Yeah. Schmidlite. So take a youngish man, who's, you know, hustling, making money, doing all those things, looking around at the country and say, how do we get to where we are? Why does it matter? And where do we go from here? I'm like, okay, you happen to be a citizen and resident of the greatest nation that God has ever created. It's the most radical experiment that's ever happened. It didn't start on 1776. It didn't start on 1619. It started in 0030. That's where it started. And it's the culmination of that. And because of that, it's critical that you play a role to keep it alive. So it's my hope is that it's explanations to arm guys. And so when people are saying, you know, you hear this cultural thing, well, you know, there's no such thing as American exceptionalism. There's Greek exceptionalism too. And, you know, there's nothing special about us. And America's done a lot of bad things too. You know, it's kind of what is. And I'm like, I'll take up those arguments all day long and twice on Sunday.
Yeah.
Because never has a nation of people been more free and more wealthy and more safe and more secure for a longer period of time than we have. And never has a nation extended all that wealth and freedom and safety outside its borders to other people.
It's certainly not to the degree that we have.
You know, the Mexicans are not building a fence right now.
To keep us out.
No. No,
Nor the Canadian.
No, when we talk about these fences, like, oh, it's the wrong thing to do. It's like, yeah, but it's facing outward. Did you notice?
Yeah.
I mean, people still, if this is such a horrible place, why are people mad that we're building a fence?
Risking life and limb.
Why aren't they thanking us for building a fence in case they would fall in accidentally?
Well, I love that, and it gives hopefully it gives other guys listening a sense of pride and also a sense of you know, accountability, right? I mean, I think we do need more of that. I guess as I read some of the other chapters, how much of this is, you know, so you kind of have an absence of faith or God, and so then your ability to make your own decisions or have your own beliefs changes, and then we start seeing more of the delegation of agency and just kind of, you know, what you refer to as Fat Ted, right, or meteorologist Jim, where I have all of the information I could ever want, but I don't actually form my own beliefs, and then I look to others to make decisions. I mean, is that kind of where you see some of the root of this the problem that we're trying to solve, I guess, or.
Yeah, go ahead. I would say definitely. I mean, that's to a large degree, and Dave will speak to it. But the fact that we have taken on ourselves, to your point, you couldn't have more information available to you, but everyone's afraid to do anything about it. They're afraid to take a stand. They're afraid to take because what if I screw up? Because we've also turned our world into a place where if you mess up once, baby, it's over. It's over. Yeah. You're canceled. You're done. Forget it. We don't allow for any grace, hardly, in a big sense anymore. And so, I mean, I think, would you agree that that's part of the reason why we're happy to have experts from afar make the decisions for us? Because then we can point to that guy and go, well, yeah, Cantori told me.
So without redemption and forgiveness and grace, what do you do with all the things you've done wrong? I've done bad things in my life. As Bill Greer, when I became a Christian, I told Bill Greer I was struggling. He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, I did all these horrible things." He's like, "Hero, if we made a movie, your 2 hours of your worst moments and played it for the rest of us, all we'd be is bored. You need to take that movie and stick it on and give it to Jesus and let him carry it, because that's why you went to the cross." He's got a great way of putting it. That's my mentor. So, but the guy who doesn't have that, what does he do? So I think it's the work of the devil to make you wallow in your own shame. Make you wallow in your own shame, and you can't get rid of it. And because you can't do that, you look for a way to say, "Look, I guess I'm a good guy." And who's the most unhappy? Who's yelling the loudest? I'll throw that sign in my yard, and that's fat tedism, right?
Yeah. That just trying not to get hit.
Yeah.
Everybody's throwing dodgeballs, and man, I just don't hit me.
Right.
Rather than getting in there and fighting.
And it's funny. The same guy with the paper bag got mad at me about the fat Ted thing, and I said, because
his name is Ted and he's fat. No.
Well, I think because he had a lot of yard signs, and I was like, look, you don't take it personally. I'm not aiming that at you, because you are actually a guy who has done some things about this. I know he has. Yeah. I mean, I'm talking about the guy that, in lieu of that, puts out a yard sign, that lists all his supposedly most closely held attributes, and they're all, of course, just bromides.
Yeah,
but he doesn't do anything.
No, he pulls a muscle, patting himself on the back.
Right. I mean, if you're going to put a yard sign out that says, "I love water," or whatever the heck it says on those things, I was like, why don't you just go someplace and give and love people, and give them water instead of putting the sign out?
Water for all.
Yeah. I mean, the sign thing, it doesn't do anything. All it is yard sign utopianism. That's all it is. It's fat tedism. So the expert part of this to me is, and use the old Pink Floyd song "Comfortably Numb," like, because you're just drifting, right? Mm-hmm. You're just drifting. You don't have any guilt. You don't have any responsibilities. Just waiting to die, and you gladly turn over your own decision making to a distant expert who's unaccountable, so you can never be held responsible, and you'll never have to worry about making that decision. That started, the whole thing with Jim Cantori started 8 or 9 years ago, when guys were starting workouts, and they were like, they're in other towns. What do we do if it's raining? Who makes the decision whether to
there's thunder?
Like, what do we do? I'm like, does F3 Nation make that decision? I'm like, I said,
call
listen,
me.
I'll tell you what I do. If I'm the cue of a workout here, I open up the window, I stick my big head out, and I sniff the air a little bit, and I decide on that. I said, but really, truthfully, I just drive to the place and say, at the moment, at 5:30, if it's not lightning,
right,
I'm working out. Well, what should we do? Same darn thing.
Make a decision.
Why on earth would you want to delegate that decision to me or anybody else? Certainly not Jim Cantori, a guy up in New Hampshire looking at the freaking Doppler.
Right.
You're the guy on the ground. You make that decision.
Yeah, I got in a big, I guess the way to say it would be a lively, if not heated, discussion at a Second F, Hump Day Happy Hour just a couple of weeks ago, because somebody said, well, there was ice. I guess it was maybe a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
But there was going to be ice, and they put out on the Slack, and it was like, such and such AO is closed tomorrow. And I was like, I don't, and I wasn't trying to be a jerk. I was like, help me understand what you mean when you say that. Well, on the site queue, and I closed it. And I was like, okay, I heard your words, but like, what do you mean when you say that? Well, I drove down there. Okay, so you drove down there, right? And he goes, yeah, and I determined that it was unsafe for others to come, so I told them we're done. And I said, so let me ask you this: if I showed up because I didn't see your closing, and I wanted to work out, what would you do? And he's like, well, I told you to go home. And I was like, and what if I got out of my car and went down anyway? And he was like, well, I mean, you're a grown man. I guess you'd have to make that decision. I was like, then why are you telling guys to close anything? I don't understand. Yeah. Like, and I'm not trying to be difficult, but I legitimately
he was probably thought he was doing the right thing.
He did.
And so that's where the difficulty comes. It's like he thought
it wasn't that it was ill-intentioned.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't ill-intentioned. It's just that, I think what I wanted, this goes to the COVID part. What I wanted out of the government was just the truth.
Yeah, well,
I wanted to know, tell me what the risk factors are. And tell me make whatever suggestion you want.
Sure.
Right. Make whatever recommendation you want and leave it at that. Because every man is an expert in his own risk assessment. Has to be. Because if you're not, you've given up your agency. So every time I would watch one of these, guys you'll never meet, telling me you really ought to do this or you really ought to do that. In fact, I think they should be the law. I'm like, tell you what, instead of that, just give us the stats and let us decide for ourselves.
I mean,
I think you get, and I think you guys are touching on an interesting topic, right? And we try to unpack this all the time. It's a common theme of this decision. It is a form of leadership, right? I mean, you're having to make a decision, whether it be for yourself, for your household, for a group, for the workout, for the site. And I think, you guys alluded to it somewhat. There is an initial, fear of failure. And so people will kind of slide into that fat Ted where, well, I don't really want to make a decision here because of the fear that I may fail or may do something wrong, and rob themselves of the opportunity to learn. And then I think the next component is, well, there is a level of vulnerability with being the one that's making the decision, right? I'm taking an actual stance on something that I've gotten the information and I'm making an informed decision on, and I've assumed the risk and I'm putting myself out there, right? And those two things, I think F3 has done remarkably to help guys kind of, boost their confidence or kind of encourage those types of thought making or decision making.
Yeah.
That's just my observation.
No, I agree with you 100%. In fact, that was one of the things I told this guy, and I've told countless men along the way is, first of all, don't take this so seriously. Okay. It's a workout. Don't forget that. Right. We're supposed to be having fun, enjoying each other's company and all that kind of stuff. Like, relax, so that's number one. But number two is, can you think, and Dredd, I'm going to ask you the question too, like, can you think of a place that is safer to fail than out there? Than out in the gloom, leading a workout? Is there a safer place to screw up a leadership decision?
No, I mean, we court it.
Right.
Yeah. So, right.
Yeah.
Right.
No one's going to kill you. No one's going to fire you. In fact, hopefully the likely outcome of that is that we'll be like, cool, you're doing it again tomorrow, and tomorrow it's going to be better.
We'll mock you, for your own good. Yeah. Right. I mean, as you are mocked, shall you mock.
I queued this morning in Waxhaw, North Carolina. There were 46 guys out there, and I, no matter what I did, those guys. I mean, it was relentless the whole time. Did I care? No. We keep moving, but that's the beauty, right? That's the beauty. You're exactly right.
Kind of mixing some topics together, right? So you have a guy whose boat is maybe capsized. F3 kind of pulls him back up out of the water. You develop his leadership, and then through that he gains enough confidence to realize, like, you are responsible for making your own decisions, and you have the ability. And I love the leadership development process and this idea of courting the failure, because that's how we learn. And too often the world will say, well, we don't want to set people up for failure, right? We want to avoid failure at all costs. And I think that might be another kind of misstep in our development of people. We want to teach them how to handle failure and how to learn and grow from it. So I think that's phenomenal. Curious just your thoughts, and this is maybe not so much Minivan Centurion, but I've listened to your conversations about your faith, so that, and just the areas that you align and see your relationship just continue to develop and grow, and obviously see or hear from afar, however you want to interpret that, but how has F3 kind of aided in that, and some of the andist mindset? Because I feel like I heard you say, Dredd, that your faith has actually gotten stronger as you've learned more about Dark Helmet's faith. So talk me through that, because I think, you know, in the middle, there's actually more growth to be had.
Sure. I mean, I'm way more tolerant of Dredd's wrongness now than I ever was before.
I'm a beneficiary. I'm a beneficiary of that.
No.
Yeah. So on the faith standpoint, you know, I came to faith very late in life. I was 43-ish, I think, 43. And when I did, I had a lot of catching up to do, and I didn't really have any traditions to fall back on, you know? Like, I wasn't like, oh, I was raised a Catholic, and, you know, like a lot of guys down here are.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a recovering Catholic, you know, my wife's a Baptist, so now we're Methodist. You know, I didn't have any of that. I was just a guy that suddenly believed and then was trying to catch up and figure it out. So I've always been curious about faith traditions and religious traditions and of the different denominations. And I've always asked a lot of questions about them. And I've always believed that we have different denominations because it makes us stronger as fellow believers in Christ. You know, if it's diversity of tradition in a way. So when I say diversity, I'm not talking about skin color. I'm talking about viewpoint. So, you know, that's why I try to boil it down to what are those essentials in which we must have unity, right? What do we have to believe? Do you believe that the tomb is empty? Dark Helmet does. Do you believe that we are obligated to put God before everything, put nothing before God? Dark Helmet believes that. Do you believe we should treat our neighbors as we ourselves should be treated? Yes. Those are my three, you know, and
those are the big ones.
Right. And Dark has taught me a lot about all the crazy shenanigans that they believe in the Mormon faith. Like, I know it's funny aside. Everybody knows that God created the earth in one day, and that, you know, like all religions have myths and fables, and, you know.
Yeah, no, I just happen to like my mythology more than
that's
you.
right.
Yeah.
And I've actually really enjoyed learning about the FCAM system because it's really so different than any church I've ever belonged to. And we were talking about this before. He's like, yeah, you might, what did I say?
When?
I said, you said I'm FCAM curious.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm just about as curious about FCAM as about being a transvestite. Which is high curiosity. I'm just curious.
Sure,
you know, what makes you say that? I have a curious
just
guy.
Don't put on a dress. That's
I'm a curious guy. But the FCAM structure is probably more structured than I would want.
Right.
You know, I don't work for Bank of America either. Right.
Right. Yeah, you wouldn't survive well there.
But you would be not paying much attention if you said, well, you know, the FCAM denomination hasn't been successful. It's the second fastest growing denomination in the world.
Yeah.
And the deliberateness with which FCAMs dispatch their missionaries and the commitment they have to growing their denomination and bringing men to Christ is why that is so.
Well, and I would even contend too that you know, when we send those kids out, we're sending them out so that they learn, so that they become more convicted.
Well, of course,
you know,
right.
so that they grow, right?
That's why the 70.
That's
why the 72 went out, right? So I mean, but you know, in one former denomination I was in, or church I was in, Episcopal church, and their attitude was more like, we need to just send people out to apologize. And I remember,
I didn't mean to be Episcopal.
I remember having this, you know, idiot debate, because I knew, you know, I've been a Christian for like 12 minutes, and I'm like, it says here that, and
in your book
with an Episcopal priestess, and I said, aren't we supposed to like go out and try to make other people to be Christians as well? And she said, no, there's people in Raleigh who do that. I'm not kidding you.
They're not meteorologists,
right?
Gyms. They're priest gyms.
Right.
You just let them.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what the diversity of faith in America, of different religion. For me, faith denominations are just groups. You know, they are good for people to worship together who find convenience in that, right?
Sure. Well, and to your point, you know, a guy who loves structure would struggle outside of, you know, a Catholic faith or an LDS faith.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because he wouldn't know, he wouldn't have the appropriate guardrails to lead him to God. Right. He wouldn't know. He'd be like, somebody has to tell, you know, whatever.
Right.
That's fine.
That's right.
Right. And not that I'm that way, but it's funny because I not to just to tag on, like, I think, to answer your question a little bit too, is I think I'm probably 10 times a better disciple of Jesus Christ and a better member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Mouthful.
Than I would have been had I not been associated with Dave, but also, I mean, just being around the other men of diverse faiths, you know, very diverse faiths. You know, we have Muslims and we have Hindus and all kinds of people, you know, and I look in now, and whereas before, I think I sat back and kind of went like, no, I think that's really cool what you do, but I mean, we're right. You know, but
Yeah.
and to change it and tried to bring some of those things. I try to practice what I call, or what has been called rather, holy envy. You know, like, yes, I love my traditions and I love the things that I do, and I believe that we do have a more complete picture maybe than maybe some other folks do. But that's just that's me. That's what I think, right?
Well, I would hope so.
But there's plenty of things where I look at and I go, I have holy envy for a lot of the ways that these men, and particularly Dave, you know, practice their faith, and by kind of incorporating some of those things, and even trying to bring some of them over, you know, into my local congregation, because I don't have any influence in what happens in Salt Lake, but I can influence this group of guys here, you know, to maybe be better Christians. That's my hope, right? Sure. So I am much more happy and vibrant in my faith now than I ever would have been if you know, if I didn't have that, for sure.
Well, I think you guys are touching on what we talk about often, is the differing perspectives. Where else are you going to find a community of this size where you can have an acceptance of different perspectives? I'm a 30-year-old guy, and I'm friends with 58-year-old men who are dentists in the community, right? Different walks of faith, some same walks of faith, but to all come and somewhat be on the equal playing field and come as equals, you don't find that very often.
You don't even find it within the same congregation at a church sometimes.
Sure. And that's another theme of the minivan, is like, you got to argue, man. I mean, you got to be willing. I mean, I love to be confronted with a opposing viewpoint. I mean, in fact,
I know you do.
I don't. That's how I learn.
What do you always say? You're like, I'll argue. Wait,
I'll argue the color of the sky and give you blue to be fair, because I'm good at it.
I know.
I'll take red. You
know, that's good. And we didn't want to make it easy on you. I told Blake, I said, I don't want this to be adversarial, but we should go through the content and see if how consistent he is on his application. Let's point out the inconsistencies.
Please do.
He's like, I don't think there are any, man.
I would love that. And part of it is that, how can you expect? I'm no apologist. I don't have that gift. But how can you expect to persuade anyone to your viewpoint if you can't suffer through being argued with about it? If your worldview or your philosophy is never tested by opposition, how are you ever going to see its flaws?
Yeah.
I mean, and there's many things that I thought 10 years ago that I'm like, I wasn't quite right about that. Well, maybe not many. There's a few things.
There were three.
But that by teaming up with, gosh, I listened to this great podcast about Eisenhower. Did we talk about this?
No.
I've read books about Eisenhower, but his granddaughter wrote it.
Oh, How Ike Led.
Yes.
Yeah. I listened to the book.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. And her insight was so cool, because she's like, yeah, it's funny when I would read a biographer say, Ike did this and this is what he was thinking. She's like, I knew that wasn't right because I heard him say otherwise at dinner. But, when I listened to this whole thing, I said, I've always been kind of a distant admirer of his. But I was like, dang, I either stole his leadership philosophy or it leaked into me because
Nah.
There's-
I mean, sure, maybe. And there's
She
parts of it
literally
for sure. I know,
said,
but
she
look,
literally said andist
but what do you, did she really?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't remember that.
on the podcast.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. But I was gonna say maybe so, but you would probably also contend that, well, truth is truth, and
Yeah.
these are principles that are thousands of years old, and
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
So,
right.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
Maybe she heard your.
I'm aware my question was coming from. I had a guy that we were looking at the chapter called The Middle and some of the radical notions, and he made a comment of, well, that's religious stuff, and I don't believe in a certain religion. So trying to explain that as men and as andists, we have the ability to accept something as a radical notion, and like you said, that could mean it radically failed or it was radically successful, but just accepting the fact that it had an impact on where we are today. And I think that's kind of where, it's interesting, right? As we get sucked into the culture and kind of the separation that's happening, there's a desire to see it one way or another. And I just love this idea that it doesn't have to be that way. We can band together in the middle. And I think the other thing I just wanted to call out that I love that you included here, because this reminds me kind of sad clown syndrome, where it's kind of always this thing, right? And so you made a comment that it's kind of like addiction and recovery, right? Where you can't do this alone. You need guys that are going to call you out when your ego is caused you to want to be right. And so I think it fits really nicely into what we've already got within F3. So I really appreciate that.
honored.
We did have a couple of questions that we've been asking all of our guests, and want to get your thoughts. So one of the questions we had is, and would be curious, because you've been doing this F3 thing for a lot longer than we have, obviously. And so what sort of advice?
I mean, do you think he has? Maybe he has. I don't know. You invented it. You've been doing it a little longer than I have, maybe.
One of the questions that we've been asking is kind of, what's your words of encouragement or advice for the FNG, or for the packs that encounter an FNG? What would be your advice there?
Just tell them what it's done for you.
Yeah.
I am not the world's greatest headlocker. Actually, it's kind of funny. That's not really my gift, but I do headlock guys, and the way I do it is just tell them the truth, man. I was a fat, lonely, faithless man, and I usually tell them I had a pretty good vision of where my life was going. I could see the trajectory.
Yeah,
I've been around enough older men to know, and
there was a flushing sound,
and it wasn't good, and I was ready to try anything. So if you're ready to try anything, give this a shot. The worst thing that can happen is you throw up all over yourself, and get a goofy name.
That's right.
It's the worst.
I love it.
Love that. I was, I think for me, I was there. I was still in active substance abuse, and am now 4 years clean. So it's been phenomenal for me. The other question that we have, so just, we're men of faith, and we want to know if there's anything we can be praying about or thinking about for either of you, anything you need encouragement on or prayer on, just support for you guys.
Well, when people ask, what do I need to for them to pray, for me, I'm always taken aback, because it's usually the question that I ask of other guys, and I'm a very deliberate prayer. Like, I have a list that I go through, and I check back with guys. Hey, man, did you lose those 5 pounds? I'm just, I think that the prayer that I would ask for is double fisted. One is, or two chambers. One is that I stay within my D2X. I don't get distracted by things that are outside of that, because when I do, I lose impact, and I lose influence. And I think that's what the splitter would have. The other thing is that I'm protected from the evil one. because I don't. I guess this could sound a little bit egotistical, but I think that if I falter, it's going to harm a lot of people. It certainly harm me, and it'll harm my wife and harm my children. But as honored as I am, and I think you guys read the book, so you know what I mean by that. When someone tells me, how much F3 is done and something over it, I realize that with that honor comes responsibility, because scripturally, once you if you are going to be a teacher, you're going to be judged more harshly than you should be, because if you fail and you falter, then you've harmed people.
Yeah, you don't just take you take everybody you told.
So I fancy that I have the devil's attention, and I would ask that you pray for me to protect me from that, and that I'm protected from that, and that if I begin to falter, that men around me come and bolster me.
Aye. And he's I can attest to the fact that he's being honest about the prayer deal. I can't tell you the number of times that I get a text early in the morning, maybe that just says, "Hey man, while I was praying about you this morning, I thought of this," or while I was praying for your leadership this morning of F3, I just wanted you to know, the day that I was doing it, but also, that I'm feeling like you got this, and just encouraging and that kind of thing. And I've been very blessed to be a recipient of that. So thank you for doing that.
As men have done for me.
And as far as what I would ask, in a similar way, I I guess it's just a function of the fact of where you sit sometimes, right? That you're usually the one asking the question and say, how can I help you? What can I do for you? So you don't always have a quick answer when somebody says, well, what can I do for you? Keep doing what you're doing.
I like what you're doing.
Yeah,
keep
right.
doing.
I think for me, I guess the thing that I would ask is to always do my best to lead in the way that God would have me to. But then even before that, and this is relative or relevant to my word of the year and a lot of other things that I just, my personal gesture and struggles, right? Is just to remember whose I am, not who I am, but whose I am. That's what I would ask.
Well, I love that, and I'm certainly appreciative of you both sharing your time today. And just real quick, off the list of prayers, we've got a member in our three. His name's Samples, and he keeps a list of answered prayers. So I love that. I love that you keep a list. He's one of our respect guys, but he was the first person I've met that kept a list of answered prayers, and I just thought that was so profound to actually be praying towards something and then following up on it to make sure that it's resolved itself, or seeing how the conflict has resolved itself. So certainly appreciative of that. Well, guys, we usually wrap up with a Namerama. And if you guys are good with that,
well,
start us off.
Yeah, go.
All right. I'm John Whitworth, 30, Pony Express.
Pony Express. Hate.
The plague.
The plague. Frank Schwartz, 46, Dark Helmet.
Dave Redding, Dredd, 5'8", the War Daddy.
Active adult.
Active adult. I've got the junior depends on today.
I love it. Is that an official name change or what? No.
Negative.
Yeah, nope.
Negative.
Stay what we got.
Okay, cool. Hey, appreciate it, fellas. This was great. Really appreciate your time.